Two pieces of metal, a wooden stake, and damp soil. That's what's standing between a garden full of slugs and a garden where they won't cross an invisible line you drew in the dirt. Total cost to build this is right around $20. Rain runs it after that. You don't plug it in, you don't recharge it, you don't replace it every season. It just sits there, quietly doing its job while you sleep. The global pest control industry pulls in over $23 billion a year. A meaningful chunk of that comes from products you spray once, watch evaporate in a few hours, and then buy again next week. A $20 device that recharges every time it rains doesn't fit anywhere in that business model. And that, more than anything else, is why you're hearing about this from me and not from anyone with shelf space at your local hardware store. I'm not going to tell you this is some crazy new invention. It's not. The core mechanism behind this has been documented, tested, and quietly shelved for nearly 300 years. The science is real. The history is stranger than the science. And the build is so simple you'll probably be annoyed nobody told you sooner. Let's get into it. The principle you're working with here is called a galvanic cell. You already know what this is, even if you've never heard the term. Every battery you've ever held in your hand operates on this exact concept. Two dissimilar metals, separated by a substance that conducts ions, called an electrolyte, and a spontaneous chemical reaction that produces a continuous electrical current. In an AA battery, that electrolyte is a chemical paste. In this build, the electrolyte is wet soil. The moisture in the ground does the same job. Copper acts as your cathode. Zinc acts as your anode. When both metals sit in contact with damp earth but don't touch each other, zinc atoms begin surrendering electrons. Copper atoms collect them. Current flows. Ions release into the surrounding soil. The standard electrode potential of this pairing, copper and zinc, is about 1.1 volts under textbook conditions. In real soil, with variable moisture and mineral content, you'll see somewhere between 0.7 and 1.0 volts. That's a small number. It won't shock you. You won't feel it. But soft-bodied organisms like slugs, larvae, and ground-crawling insects operate on an entirely different scale of electrical sensitivity. Their nervous systems are orders of magnitude more reactive to ionic disruption than yours. When a slug's mucous membrane contacts copper ions dissolved in the soil moisture, it creates a microgalvanic reaction against the slug's own body chemistry. The result is something between a sharp irritation and a neurological stop signal. They reach the boundary and turn back. Not sometimes. Reliably. Here's the part that keeps sitting with me. This isn't fringe science dressed up in new language. This reaction was first documented in Paris in 1747. Abbé Jean-Antoine Nollet was the personal physicist to King Louis XV. The man once sent an electrical charge through a chain of 200 monks standing in a circle just to prove that electricity travels through human bodies instantaneously. He was not shy about experimentation. In 1747, Nollet set up two identical pots of soil. Same seeds, same sunlight, same water. One variable. One pot received a low electrical current for roughly 10 hours a day. Within 3 days, the electrified seeds had broken the soil surface. The control seeds hadn't cracked their shells, but buried in his notes, almost as a footnote, was something else. Small flies gathered freely around the uncharged pot. The electrified one sat in what Nollet described as a zone of isolation. Insects approached the boundary and turned away, as if hitting a wall that wasn't there. He didn't theorize about the mechanism. He just wrote down what he saw, and then the scientific establishment filed it away and moved on for nearly a century. Edinburgh, 1841. Alexander Bain was a Scottish clockmaker who needed cheap, continuous electricity and had zero patience for expensive solutions. His idea was beautifully simple: one copper plate and one zinc plate, buried in wet ground behind his workshop, connected by a wire above the surface. He checked his voltmeter. Roughly 1 volt. No acid, no generator, no chemical bath. Just two metals and damp earth. He called it the Earth Battery. It ran his clocks for months without intervention. And almost as an afterthought in his patent notes, British patent 8763 if you want to look it up, he mentioned that the biting flies around his workshop had disappeared entirely. A Scottish landowner named Robert Forster read about Bain's work and scaled the idea up. He ran a copper and zinc wire network across his barley fields near Elgin and published the results in the British Cultivator in March 1845. Pest damage dropped to near zero. No aphids, no beetles. His field workers reported that clouds of biting insects that normally swarmed them at dusk halted at the edge of the treated fields and turned back. Edward Solly, a Fellow of the Royal Society, wrote up the accumulated evidence that same year in the Journal of the Horticultural Society. The findings were called remarkable. And then, once again, nothing happened. Fast forward to the 1920s, a French engineer named Justin Christofleau built what must have looked completely unhinged to his neighbors. A tall post, topped with spiraling copper and zinc wire, underground wires fanning out into the damp soil, the whole structure aligned along the Earth's magnetic axis. He filed the first electroculture patent in 1920. His oat crops grew over 7 feet tall, without a gram of synthetic fertilizer. Grapevines that had been devastated by phylloxera recovered and produced heavy harvests. Insect pests vanished from treated plots. He manufactured and sold over 150,000 units across Europe before the Second World War shut his factory down. Entire farms running pest-free on nothing but copper, zinc, and wet earth. So here's the question that matters. If the evidence has been accumulating since 1747, why have you never heard any of this until right now? The answer isn't conspiracy. It's economics, and the timeline makes it painfully clear. In 1912, an international conference at Reims reviewed the accumulated evidence for electroculture. The consensus was straightforward. It works, the science is real, and large-scale adoption should be seriously discussed. Then 1914 happened. The war physically destroyed the electroculture infrastructure that had been built across European farmland. When the fighting ended, munitions factories across the continent sat idle with enormous chemical stockpiles and industrial capacity, but no market. The pivot was fast and deliberate. The Haber-Bosch process, which had been synthesizing ammonia for explosives, became the foundation of nitrogen fertilizer production. By the end of World War II, the United States alone had built 10 large-scale ammonia plants for munitions, and every one of them transitioned to fertilizer manufacturing. The insecticide side is even more direct. In 1936, a German chemist named Gerhard Schrader was working at the IG Farben laboratory in Leverkusen, tasked with developing a new synthetic insecticide. On December 23rd of that year, he synthesized tabun, an organophosphate compound so toxic it was immediately classified as a nerve agent. Schrader went on to develop sarin, soman, and cyclosarin. After the war, the underlying organophosphate chemistry was reformulated for agricultural use. The chemical industry didn't just enter agriculture, it absorbed it. The Earth battery wasn't disproven or debunked. It was made economically irrelevant by an industry that needed you to buy the same product every single week. Now, here's the modern research that ties the entire historical thread together. In 2015, Dr. Norbert Becker at the German Mosquito Control Association, affiliated with the University of Heidelberg, published a study in the journal Parasites and Vectors. His team placed mosquito larvae, the same species that carry dengue and Zika, into small water containers and introduced metallic copper in different forms. Euro coins, copper tubing, a thin metallic copper spray applied to the interior surface. The results were definitive. Copper concentrations below 500 parts per billion achieved 100% larval mortality within 2 weeks. Containers sprayed with metallic copper saw all tested larvae dead within 7 to 10 days in the lab. Under field conditions, the reduction rate hit 99.44% for one species and 99.6% for another, sustained for approximately 3 months. The dissolved copper levels remained far below the World Health Organization's threshold for drinking water safety. No environmental toxicity, no chemical additives, just the metal and the water it sat in. Here's what makes this fundamentally different from every spray on a store shelf. Insects develop resistance to synthetic chemicals. That's well documented and it's accelerating. But they cannot develop resistance to metal ion toxicity. The physics doesn't evolve. The electrochemistry doesn't change. Copper ions disrupt cellular respiration and nervous system function in soft-bodied organisms through direct chemical interaction. There's no genetic workaround for a larva whose cell membranes are being destabilized by dissolved metal. The mechanism is permanent. Now here's the build. The materials are simple and cheap. First, bare 16-gauge copper wire. You want 99.9% pure copper. No coating, no enamel. A 1-pound spool runs between $13 and $15 online and gives you well over 100 feet. One spool builds multiple stakes with wire left over. Second, galvanized steel wire. The galvanized coating is zinc, and that zinc is your reactive electrode, your anode. A 100-foot roll of 14-gauge galvanized wire at any hardware store runs $8 to $10. Third, bamboo stakes or wooden dowels roughly 3 feet long. A pack of 10 at any garden center costs about $5. Total for everything comes to around $20 to $25. That gets you at least 3 complete stakes with plenty of wire to spare for other applications. Here's how you put it together. Take about 3 feet of bare copper wire and wrap it in a loose spiral around the lower 18 inches of one stake. The spiral should be roughly an inch apart. You're not trying to create a solid coil, just consistent contact points that will sit below the soil line. Take about 3 feet of galvanized steel wire and wrap it in the same pattern around the same stake, but offset from the copper spirals. Both metals need to contact the soil when the stake goes in. And this is the part that matters most. They must not touch each other. Not above ground, not below it. If the two metals make direct contact, you short-circuit the galvanic cell. Electrons flow directly between the metals instead of through the soil electrolyte. No ion release, no current through the ground, no effect. That's the one mistake that kills the whole build, and it's the one people make most often. Drive the stake about 8 to 12 inches into damp soil. Moisture is everything. It's the electrolyte that activates the entire galvanic reaction. Dry soil does nothing. If you're setting up during a dry spell, pour a quart of water around the base to get it started. After that, rain recharges it automatically. You walk away. For a garden bed, place stakes every 8 to 10 feet around the perimeter. For a campsite, build 3 stakes and position them in a triangle. One near your tent, one near your cooking area, one near your fire pit. That covers a zone of roughly 200 square feet. For standing water, rain barrels, bird baths, that low spot in the yard that never fully drains, take whatever copper wire you have left, coil it loosely, and drop it directly into the water. Leave it there. The copper ions release continuously into the standing water, and based on the Becker data, you're looking at near-total larval mortality within 1 to 2 weeks. No mosquito dunks, no monthly treatments, no chemicals, just copper sitting in water doing what copper does. Something happened on my own property before I understood any of this. And it's worth telling because it's what sent me down this path in the first place. Last July, I had 2 rain barrels running on opposite sides of the house. One sat beneath the downspout that passes across a section of copper roof, flashing before the water enters the barrel. The other was pure plastic, collecting straight off a different section of roof. By midsummer, the plastic barrel was a mosquito nursery. I was dumping and scrubbing it every 3 days just to keep up. The barrel fed by the copper flashing stayed clean the entire season. Not once did I see a single larva in it. I genuinely thought it was luck, or a difference in sun exposure, or some quirk of water temperature. Then I found the Becker study and it stopped me cold. Copper residue leaching off that roof flashing was doing exactly what the lab data would later confirm. I had the answer sitting on my roof for years and had absolutely no idea. There's something humbling about that, realizing the solution was 12 feet above your head the whole time. Quietly working while you were buying products to solve a problem that had already been solved. There's a sensory quality to this build that I didn't expect. Pushing the stake into wet earth after a morning rain, the faint metallic smell of the copper wire mixing with the clean scent of damp soil. Within a few weeks, a pale green patina starts forming on the copper spirals below the surface. That patina is copper carbonate. It's proof the ions are releasing. The whole thing just sits there in the garden, doing its quiet chemistry. And you almost forget it's working until you notice the lettuce doesn't have holes in it anymore. One honest note, because I want to keep this straight with you. This is not a force field. It won't stop a wasp mid-flight. It won't drop a hornet out of the air. The mechanism works through ion release into moist soil and standing water, which means it's effective against ground-crawling soft-bodied pests, slugs, snails, ground-nesting larvae, crawling insects moving through the treated soil zone. It's remarkably effective against mosquito larvae in standing water. But if your soil dries out completely during a drought, and you don't water the base of the stakes, the galvanic reaction stops. No moisture, no electrolyte, no current, no ions. It restarts the moment the soil gets wet again. But you need to understand that dependency. And I want to be real with you. In regions where mosquito-borne diseases like malaria or dengue are an active medical concern, this does not replace professional vector control programs. It's a powerful supplemental tool, not a standalone public health intervention. Now think about the economics for a moment. A single can of name-brand outdoor insect repellent spray runs $15 to $25 and lasts maybe a few applications. A professional perimeter spray service for your yard costs between $40 and $70 per treatment, and they recommend monthly visits through the season. That's $300 to $500 a year for chemical applications that break down within hours and leave residue in your soil. $20? One afternoon, and rain handles the rest. The math is not complicated. It's just not math that anyone selling you a monthly service wants you to do. Somewhere in the last 100 years, as the hardware store aisle filled up with branded cans and the pest control truck became a regular sight in every suburban neighborhood, this knowledge stopped being passed down. It wasn't hidden in some vault. It was published in scientific journals, filed in patent offices, demonstrated on working farms across Europe. It sat in plain sight, technically available to anyone who went looking. but buried under $100 billion of marketing for products designed to expire the moment you use them. The Earth battery was never debunked. It was just outspent. I don't know what brought you here. Maybe it's the slugs destroying your lettuce every spring. Maybe it's the mosquitoes that turn your back porch into a no-go zone every evening from June through September. Maybe you're tired of reading ingredient labels on spray cans and wondering what exactly you're breathing in. Maybe you just like understanding how things actually work, and you ended up here at 1 in the morning because an algorithm made a decision you can't explain. Doesn't matter. It works either way. $20, one afternoon, and the rain takes it from there. That's it. Hope you learned something useful today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.